Today we're going to show you how to use the Sectional Matrix. You have two matrices in your kit. You have a regular one, and you have a, which I believe is a size 1, and then you have a size 2. The size 2 is sometimes called an MOD band, sometimes called a dolly band. I'll let you all figure out what that means.
Dolly Parton, yeehaw!
So today we're going to use, for this we're going to use just this regular one. So I'm going to place this in this groove through the slot, and now this can come out in 3 different ways. It can come straight out, it can go this way, or it can go that way. If I put it on and I don't know what I'm doing and I just tighten it up and I say, oh, I'm going to do this on tooth number 30. This isn't going to work so well because we don't typically put the matrix holder from the tongue side. Not typically. Sometimes we do when we have to. In lab, it's not going to be likely that you'll have to do that very often. In the clinic, totally different story. So since I did this wrong, I'm going to have to loosen this up here on the end. And I'm going to swing this around and bring it in from the other direction. And then I'm going to kind of bend it back so it's coming out the side the way it belongs. So to place this on number 30, I'm going to just slide it over the tooth, but it won't slide through the distal contact for me. You're going to find that these typodonts are kind of stiff. They don't allow you to place things as nicely maybe as our old typodonts did. So to create space, I'm going to place a wedge. And I'm going to have to wedge this in there pretty hard to actually create space so I can slide even just this thin matrix down between number 30 and 31. But now that's done that. So it slid down in there. So as I'm sliding that in, I'm going to pull my wedge out. Okay, so it's in. Now, really you want this part of the retainer coming in as centrally as possible for most situations. So you can slide this back and forth side to side. But now I'm going to use this part of the wing nut and I'm going to tighten that up, holding this band down in place. Make sure that everything's nice and tight as you're doing it. If it feels like it's slipping and it's not tightening, you maybe didn't tighten this enough. And I actually had to do that. I hadn't tightened it enough, so I had to tighten it again. I'm a little off center, so I can always swing it around just a little bit, but that's about right where you want it to be.
And make sure that you are below your gingival seat, whether it's on one side of the tooth or if you have an MOD on both sides of the teeth, because if you're tightening it too high, it's not going to be sealed down on your gingival seat.
Now it's time to pick my wedge. I have numerous wedges available to me, little ones, big ones, wide base, small base, slim jims. I can't give you an answer as to which is the perfect one because it all depends on your prep. The perfect wedge seals the seat and provides a gingival embrasure and holds the band tight. So I typically will go for a little one on these if I can. Typically we're going to wedge from the lingual. I'm going to slide this right into the embrasure. I'm going to use the back side of my cotton forceps and I'm going to push it into place. Then I'm going to look. I'm going to look down into my prep, into the box on my class 2, and I'm going to say, are there any gaps between my band and my gingival seat? I would say no. I'm going to use my mirror and I'm going to look from the lingual. And I'm going to see, is my band seated? Is it down at the gingival level? Yes and no. On this typodont, it doesn't want to go down quite as low as I'd like it. But my wedge is filling up my gingival embrasure space, which means I should be doing just fine. One other thing, make sure you look down into your prep. Move your mirror around so you can look into your prep, because sometimes once this band goes on, it provides a lot of nice light reflection so you can see better. And make sure in the case of gingivally in a mouth, for real, that there's no blood or saliva seeping in.
You might even see caries in there that you need to still take out. It's okay to take the band off, remove caries, adjust the prep. You might not like your line angle when you can see it with contrast with the band on. Totally okay to take off the band, fix something, put the band back on. Better to fix it early and spend an extra 2 minutes now than have to fix it and spend 20 minutes later.
So now that I'm pretty satisfied with how this is sitting on here, one last thing. I need to check to see that this part of this metal band is touching tooth number 29. If this is not physically touching tooth 29, I stand a 100% chance that I will not have a contact at this point. So what am I going to do to make it touch? I'm going to burnish it. I'm going to push it. This is malleable stainless steel. I can bend this. I can push it up against the tooth next door. When you've done this, I would suggest you hold this whole complex up to the light and try to look through that embrasure to see if it is indeed touching the tooth next door. If it is, I'm satisfied at this point that I could go ahead and restore this tooth. I'm going to show you how to use what we call in this school the MOD band. You'll find that if you talk to people in other places that they don't always call it the MOD band. Sometimes it's called a dolly, based on the two bumps. And this was the band we used on the last video. You can see how it's really bent up. But one thing I forgot to mention was the sad side, the frowny side, goes towards the gingiva. So when you bend this, you now have a narrower end and a wider end. It basically follows the anatomy of the tooth. Makes sense. Occasionally we see these placed on upside down. It doesn't take us long to recognize it because it looks really strange. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention is if the band gets really bent and it gets a big kink in it and you can't straighten it out, just get a new band. They aren't that expensive. It's not worth your time to try and straighten it out. All right, so we're going to use the MOD band. I have an MOD prepped on tooth number 20. The distal of the prep, the gingival seat, is deeper than the mesial. This could be a good indication to use this band. Dr. Radnicki, do we always use an MOD band when we do an MOD?
No. MOD band is a misnomer. It should be called a deep gingival seat band, but that doesn't roll off the tongue quite as nicely. So you're only using these when you have a gingival seat that is deep enough that you need the extra gingival incisal height.
Right, so in this case, because one of my gingival seats is somewhat of a normal height and my other gingival seat is deeper, I don't need both of these bumps. I only need one. Now, you can cut whichever one off you want. I don't care, because guess what? This band can turn either way. So right at this point, I'm going to trim this off, and it's gone. Sometimes leaves a little bit of a sharp edge here. Be careful not to cut yourself. Sometimes I just run my fingernail back along it and smooth it out again. All right, I have a bump. Only one. If these were both deep gingival seats, I would leave both bumps on there. But in this case, I'm not. So I want this to be on this side. So I'm actually going to turn my band this way. So this way, the bump is there on the distal, and the place where I cut off on the mesial basically is like a regular old band, like the one we just talked about. So if I place this in my retainer again, tighten it up. I placed it on straight. I could probably do straight on this tooth pretty easily because it's a premolar. The patient would allow you that you can get this past their cheek, or you can turn it.
An advantage of doing it straight is that it's easier to place your wedges without running into the Toffelmeyer because you have an MOD and will have a wedge on both sides of the teeth.
Right, but I'll turn it just for the sake of turning it. Tighten, 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 tighten. You can see how small it actually has to get for this tooth. This is actually probably not the best use because this band is, or this seat is still not deep enough. So there it is placed on there. Now I need to wedge. I need to wedge both sides in this case. It's an MOD. I have 2 gingival seats. Both sides, distal and mesial, need to be wedged. When I wedge, maybe not so much for the typodont, but even for the typodont, I'm going to hold my finger over top. Now I can wedge from the facial on this distal side because the retainer is not in my way. But a lot of times we still want to wedge from the lingual, so let's do that anyway. Even though the retainer is not in my way, which embrasure is normally the bigger embrasure? The answer, lingual. So oftentimes we're wedging the lingual. One wedge, this is not looking good. You guys will get the drift though.
And just because it doesn't look good doesn't mean it won't work.
That's true. Good point. Now this is probably too tall, and I'm doing this only for demonstration purposes. At this point, this gingival seat really isn't deep enough to use this band. This is too tall. This is too much matrix above the occlusal level of your prep. I mean, this is easily, what, almost 5 to 6 millimeters too high if I measure with the probe. Really, this should be near the level of your occlusal. But again, this was for demonstration purposes. If I had a much deeper prep, it would make more sense and it would look more normal. But again, I've wedged both sides. I can kind of verify that my seats are closed. If this was for real, I'd change this prep out, or this band out completely.
We're going to demonstrate how to put on a Garrison sectional matrix. Some of you may talk about it as though it's the name Garrison is the type of matrix. Garrison is a name brand, Paladin is a name brand. These are sectional matrices. So they come in a lot of different kits. They get remade each year in slightly different setup. So sectional matrix is the overall term for them. Many different matrices for a sectional matrix. Big green one with a little loop that extends down, tiny little gray one. There's a Teflon coating on the inside where the color is that will help it not stick as much, and then just regular coating on the outside. When you put these in, you're going to choose your matrix. You're going to choose a wedge, whether it be a wood wedge or a wedge that fits with the size of the band according to the Garrison people. And you're also going to pick a spreader. There's a blue and an orange. Other kits have similar situations. The blue is a shorter piece, where much more likely to be used for premolars or pedo teeth. Orange is going to be more universal. Probably can be still used for premolars and pedo teeth, but also used for molars. So in this case, we're going to work on number 30, and we're going to use the orange. So generally on molars, I pick the green. We want the smile side down because it is the extension down into the proximal box and the gingival seat, as well as, if you're thinking of cusp tips, you have a cusp tip down into a marginal ridge and a cusp tip, so it follows the contours of the tooth. I always place this first, make sure that I am below my gingival seat. Sometimes this wants to pop up, whether it be because of gingiva, because of a loose fit, because of an overextended prep, things like that. So sometimes you'll have to put your finger on top of it to hold it down as you put your wedge in there. And from a wedge standpoint, I almost always use a green or an orange, or I'll use a balsa wedge Slim Jim. I'm going to put the Slim Jim in here today because it fits a little bit better in typodonts. It doesn't come out as much. There's a little more friction. So I'm holding it down, placing that wedge, making sure that it's in there, and then pushing it through. Now in this case, I'm going to check and make sure that this is solid and it's not going to just easily pull out. I'm going to take a look, see that I'm sealed in my gingival seat, and then I'm going to put my spreader on. Keep in mind, I have a typodont, so I can move it around any which way I want. There's a neck and the rest of the head here on a real human being, and there's a cheek right here. So almost always we're going to place our spreader moving anteriorly. There's exceptions, but most of the time that's going to be the case. So I place it on, make sure it's not popping out. Now in this case I'm running into these incisors, so maybe I'm going to put it on the opposite way. Flip it around. There's no right or wrong way, it's just the way that works for you. Now I can't really get it on because I'm running into the incisors here, so it worked better the first way. Totally okay to try things out. So I place it as low as I can, make sure that I'm holding down the matrix. Place that. And I always go back and burnish out, make sure that I'm touching the adjacent tooth. And I look and make sure each corner is sealed. Look at the band. I don't care what it looks like out here. This can be bent all that we want out here and here. But from right here to right here, from your lingual proximal to your buccal proximal, I want to make sure that it's the contour of the tooth that I'm trying to recreate.